Hello, everybody. I know we are still having our tea. Some people just came in. But while we get that done, please let us still pay attention as we continue. We want to finish on time so that people that came from outside of the state can make it back home on time. But before we go into the second stage, we had actually earlier passed slips around for us to have a breakout session. But the presenters have come back to us to say that they want to have the case with the whole class so that we'll try and change sections, housing over 25 attorneys, prosecuting cases generated from the Attorney General's investigative units or assigned the AG's office, including the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force, AICAC, statewide enforcement of crimes against undocumented residents, Lake City, Salt Lake County District Attorney's Office. He focused in areas of domestic violence and elder abuse, neglect and exploitation, and violent crime. He continued his focus on crime involving victims with the Attorney General's Office, prosecuting state and federal cases involving serious felony crime associated with victims and perpetrators within the immigration community as the secure prosecutor, including the successful prosecution of human trafficking cases. Greg currently works closely with other executive branch members, legislatures, and judiciary as a designee of the Attorney General. Over the past 4 years, Greg has assisted legislators to better clarify language and increase penalties for state aggravated human trafficking and aggravated human smuggling offenses. During the 2016 General Legislative Session, Greg worked with the legislature to successfully extend the state harbor provision on behalf of the most vulnerable trafficked children. He is co-captain of the statewide human trafficking task force sponsored through the Utah Attorney General's Office and is the recipient of the 2014 Public Policy Award from the Utah Council on Victims of Crime. The second presenter is Nate Mutter. Nate Mutter is the section chief of the Special Investigation and Public Corruption Unit in the Utah Attorney General's Office, where he has led a number of investigations of human trafficking cases. Section Chief Mutter oversees the Secure Unit, which is legislatively mandated to investigate human trafficking and fraudulent government documents. He holds a master's degree in Homeland Security and Terrorism and is heavily involved in statewide in trainings to law enforcement on police use of force. He's an active member of the Utah Trafficking in Persons Task Force. Prior to his time with the Utah Attorney General's Office, Sections Chief Mutter spent 6 years with Logan City Police Department. Ladies and gentlemen, I present Mr. Greg Frebrachi and Nate Mutter. A round of applause as they come.
Thank you for allowing us to be here. It is quite an honor to be both in Nigeria and in Calabar. So thank you, and we appreciate the opportunity to speak with you about our experiences and hopefully to learn from your experiences as well. As you heard, the many challenges that you experience in Nigeria with human trafficking, that list is the same list that we would have in the United States, and more particularly in Utah. So although it says case presentation, our hope is that you'll have questions for us, and in turn we'll have questions for you during the presentation. So please raise your hand or interject when you would like to have a conversation. We would actually encourage that so that we can have that exchange of experience and exchange of ideas as we go through our presentation. Our presentation is both our experiences and understanding both of how we handle our cases, as well as a case presentation that we conducted 2 years ago. It's a rather large case that we handled, and it covers a broad spectrum of the issues that we deal with, and some of the training and some of the experience that we acquired and applied it to that case to help us be successful in that prosecution. The first concept, and I think we can all share in that, and we've been speaking about that, frankly, over the past couple of days with our hosts, which is supply and demand. That's really the basic premise that we all have, regardless of where you reside or what culture you come from, is supply and demand with human trafficking, and how to best address that. The one thing that I think is important is from where we came from, or where we work with human trafficking, is the state of Utah, which is central. It's not bordered to any other countries, but it's in the middle of the country. And as we began to look for human trafficking through the Attorney General's office, the state's Attorney General office, with our investigators and our prosecutors, we really had to convince our legislator, our executive branch, our judicial branch that this was occurring. And there wasn't a lot of support, because the belief was that human trafficking could not possibly occur in a central state in the United States. And so as we continued to bring forward these cases, this case in particular, it really, we began to educate ourselves, but we began to educate those that were decision makers and help them understand that this is in fact happening, that it can happen anywhere, regardless of where you reside, whatever country you live in. The supply and demand of human trafficking is prevalent, and it does exist. And so this case will kind of demonstrate that as well.
Now, this news clip isn't necessarily about the case we're going to talk about today, but just like Greg had got done saying, there's a lot of people in Utah that do not believe that human trafficking exists in that state. And so we like to show this news clip, especially when we're giving presentations to local law enforcement within the state of Utah, prosecutors within the state of Utah, in hopes to maybe open their eyes that human trafficking exists not only in Utah but everywhere. And as you guys are here learning about that, and we're learning about human trafficking issues in Nigeria, it's everywhere. And so we just like to show this clip as an introduction.
Arrested 2 people for forcing a woman into prostitution. And tonight, victim advocates hope that case will raise our awareness about human trafficking.
They say modern-day slavery is more prevalent than we may think. News specialist Sandra Yee is live in Salt Lake County. Sandra?
Dave and Deanie, 2 people from New York are here in the Salt Lake County jail accused of human trafficking and kidnapping, and police say the victim managed to escape during a stop here in Utah. Now, people familiar with these kind of cases tell us that that particular victim is one of the lucky ones.
Low risk, high return.
Modern-day slavery.
It is the fastest growing criminal enterprise.
Is happening in our own backyards.
I think people would be very surprised to learn that it's very prevalent here in Utah.
In the past year, Atkin has worked with victims in 5 different trafficking cases, including the young victims of this man, Victor Rax. Rax, arrested in February, was accused of recruiting undocumented boys for sex and selling drugs. Atkin says traffickers often prostitution.
It is shocking and it is horrible, but it is more prevalent than we like to believe.
Statistics during a 5-year period show there were 89,000 calls about trafficking to a nationwide hotline. Nearly 300 of those calls were from Utah. 2 years ago, Atkin, along with 2 other victim advocates, started a task force to raise awareness and provide resources. The task force also has a local hotline so people can report what's often a hidden crime. The hope is both will lead to more awareness and uncover more cases.
It could be happening in your neighborhood. You just don't know it.
And she says it's not just sex trafficking. There are many cases of forced labor. Now, we posted more information on our website at KSL.com, and you'll also see possible signs of trafficking to look out for. Back to you.
Yeah, they're right. I think a lot of people don't realize this is a problem. So thanks, Sandra.
The Utah.
So as you notice, the very beginning of the story, the people that were arrested were from New York. And New York is 2,500 miles away. And here they are in Utah trafficking people for, in this particular case, it was sex solicitation. So again, it's everywhere. There's no community that this doesn't touch in one way or another. So before we get going, we were curious to know how many prosecutors are here. If we can, prosecutors, criminal prosecutors? Few. Law enforcement, any police? Police? 1, 2, all right. Victim advocates, maybe? Anyone from victim services? Victim services? University students? Should see a handful of hands there. What else am I missing?
Attorneys, defense attorneys.
Defense attorneys? I'll hold my comments there.
Is there anybody else that we missed? Any other service or no?
Well, again, thank you for being here, and thank you for having us here. And we appreciate it, and we hope that through this presentation that we get to share ideas and fight the fight against human trafficking.
So it's quite similar. Our statute is quite similar, and I think really it's force, fraud, and coercion wherever you look. Any force, fraud, and coercion that overcomes the will of an individual is really what trafficking is about. And whether it be exploitation or other means, it's addressing the vulnerabilities of that individual and removing their will through that force, fraud, and coercion. In Utah, we've adopted that as well, and it's quite similar to the federal statute. Some of the elements that we have to demonstrate, and which makes human trafficking a very difficult charge. Human trafficking, to prove it, and we'll get into that, not only does it require, under most circumstances, a victim to testify under cross-examination and to tell their story in front of others, which is a very difficult thing to do. As attorneys, as prosecutors, or defense attorneys, the focus is the ability to show what elements were committed. In our state, threatening serious harm, physical restraint, destroying, concealing, removing, possessing any passports, so the travel documents that would be required so that they cannot leave, abusing or threatening legal process of the law. As with any person in a foreign country, you're not familiar with the concepts, with how to reach police or law enforcement. So that abuse is very it's very capable of influencing a person. Using a condition of a person of being a debtor due to pledge, so servitude in all its forms. And go ahead. The one thing that we have done, and I think I read that in your statute as well, at least your federal statute, is because we believe a child cannot consent to engaging in commercial sex, it is no longer an element of the crime that we have to show consent or that they engaged. Any child under the age of 18 who's engaged in commercial sex is a victim, and we are able to then prosecute. And I think that's similar to the federal statute that you guys assert as well. where there's a recruiting, harbor, transporting, or obtain. So we tried to make that language as broad as possible, involving a child for sexual exploitation or forced labor. In Utah, at least, there's a lot of farm, there's a lot of immigration that comes into Utah for that purpose, and there is quite a bit of exploitation for labor purposes as well. So no force, fraud, or coercion is required, and it's really been very helpful in our ability to proceed through the investigation and prosecution. I'll get to the point multiple times, but really the law is intended to be asserted against these heinous crimes. And what we have been doing over the past 4 or 5 years as we gain experience is we go back to the legislature or the governing body over the law and ask them to modify the law so that we can facilitate those investigations and prosecutions. Certainly, we want to make sure that it's fair and it's constitutional, such that if an innocent person is charged, they have a fight, they're able to assert their innocence. But human trafficking is incredibly sophisticated and incredibly diverse, meaning that you just can't foresee what the action is going to be or the criminal conduct. And frankly, we've come to the adage that the more unlikely the story, the more likely it is to be true. And we found that the more heinous the act and the more unbelievable the report from a victim is in the end substantiated, and as unbelievable as it was actually true. It had actually happened to these victims. This case is that we'll get into. Oh, all right. Okay. All right. So trafficking indicators, and I'm sure these are quite similar to what you experience as well. This is from the federal government that we hand out as much as we can, which include is the victim in possession of identification travel documents? Was the victim coached on what to say to law enforcement and immigration officials? Was the victim recruited for the purpose and forced to engage in some other job? Is there a salary? Was the victim forced to perform sexual acts? Does the victim have freedom of movement? As to those particular ones, we've really engaged in a training with the professionals that surround where we would discover those facts. Medical personnel, emergency room, physicians. So we've spent some time through our training to engage with those professionals so that they can begin to become aware. Because as I said early on, in our particular state, for whatever reason, they felt that wasn't happening. And so as we've trained individuals and trained those professionals, it became more apparent that it is happening and it is more prevalent than we believed. And so the training aspect, if you know, and I've heard you guys say that as well, where you're out in the community, and I think that's incredibly important, because we as law enforcement, prosecutors, victim services, we can't be everywhere all of the time. And so your ability to get out and share your experiences so that the community can identify trafficking and assist you in initiating those investigations is imperative to success of eradicating the trafficking in your community.
I'm gonna make a couple comments from a law enforcement perspective on some of these things and things that we see when we're out on the road, you know, doing traffic stops or making arrests or you know, whatever that raises these red flags for us. So the possession of travel documents. When you're out and a police officer will make a traffic stop, you have the driver that's in possession and command of everybody in the vehicle's documents, their identification, their visas, their you know, social security cards or whatever it is. None of the people in the car will have them, and the trafficker will. Can anyone guess why? Why would that be important? What's that? Control, very much so. But why though? All they have is their documents. What control is that? They can't go anywhere, right? They can't prove who they are when they're out and about. So they're kind of at the mercy of the trafficker because they don't have any of their documents. They don't have their driver's license. They don't have their passport. You know, when I first got here to Nigeria, I had to show my passport like 10 times, right? What if I didn't have that? You know, what if Marcus back there had all my documents? You know, I would have to subside to whatever Marcus wants to do because he's got all my information. And that's the kind of stuff that we look for when we're out there on the road making these traffic stops, okay? And that's just one indicator. All these are just indicators. Maybe you have one or two. That doesn't mean you have trafficking. But if you have one or two, you know, the red flags start popping up and you want to ask more questions, okay? Was the victim coached on what to say? So on a roadside traffic stop, if I go to my driver, my trafficker, and say, hey, you know, or what are you guys up to or whatever, this person will talk to me, okay? I go to the passenger, so, sir, what are you guys doing? Where are you guys heading? It's like, what? You talking to me? You know? If they're staring at me with that blank look, or oftentimes he'll just look at the trafficker and won't say anything. You know, head down, look away. Okay, they're being coached on how to act, what to say, you know, things of that nature. And so you got to look for those behavioral clues when you're looking at these red flags for trafficking. Let's see. Has the victim been threatened with deportation? Okay, we'll get to that in the case study as well. But a lot of the times, you know, traffickers will use that fear of being deported to control their victims. Okay, when we have an undocumented resident in Utah, or I'd imagine anywhere, one of their biggest fears is being arrested and deported. There's a large Hispanic community of undocumented residents in the state of Utah, some of which came over as a baby, okay, and now they're 25 years old, and they still don't have documents. And then the police can arrest and send them back to Mexico. Did they grow up in Mexico? Do they have anything in Mexico? Do they know anybody in Mexico? No, they don't have family ties, they don't have work, they don't have anything to go back to because their whole lives have been spent in the United States, and now they're threatened with deportation, okay? So the trafficker will use that and hold that over their head to say, you're going to stay here and you're going to do what I tell you, or I'm going to turn you into immigration and have you deported. So it's a very strong tool that they use when it comes to controlling their victims. Can the victim freely contact friends or family? So recently, last week even, there was a case in Utah where a young girl had traveled from the north part of Utah and went to Las Vegas willingly. Las Vegas, you guys ever heard of Las Vegas? City of sin, right? What stays in Vegas, or what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas? Yes. So
marketing words, huh?
right. So this young lady went to Las Vegas with some of her friends and didn't come home. And the friends that she went with said something about she met a pimp and left with the pimp. And now she was nowhere to be seen. Okay? She disappeared, essentially. The trafficker, I don't like to call them pimps, I like to call them traffickers. The trafficker essentially had her cut all communication, which is why no one knew really where she was. And they actually did find her, and I'll get to that. But no Facebook, no telephone, no nothing, right? She couldn't. What comes to mind when you talk about, or when you just say human trafficking? What comes to mind? And I heard some of it earlier in your talk. What kind of things just pop in your head when you think of human trafficking? Hold on. What's that? Slavery? Okay, modern day slavery. So, all right, so let's carry that further. What comes to mind when you think of slavery? Bondage, right? Like physical bondage, physical handcuffs. You're physically trapped somewhere. Okay? That's not necessarily the case. And that's the stuff that we have to get over in law enforcement and in prosecution, is that trafficking victims, they're not necessarily trapped. Okay? And we'll talk about this in our case study. But these kids, they were walking around, they were going to school, they interacted with the police. The police stopped our suspect with trafficked kids in the car, separated them, talked to them. Not one victim ever came forward and said, hey, police, I'm being trafficked, help me. Not one time. And yet they were free to move. So we have to get over that initial thought that just because someone is being human trafficked, they're physically trapped, because that's not the case. Okay? It's all a mental game. They're mentally trapped. And so before we get into that power and control wheel, I just wanted to talk to you about that a little bit. So, power and control wheel. Sir. Well, with children, we don't have to prove that part. The psychological control, the force, fraud, or coercion. So in those cases, we don't really concern our investigation necessarily with that, although we do like to be able to prove that anyway. But we don't have to prove that because they're under 18. Now, over 18, that's a huge part of our case, and we have to fully dive into that psychological aspect, that control. I would argue with you that the indicators are there. You just have to find them. You have to be able to identify them, and it takes time. And we'll get into that when we're talking about the investigation, the resources that are put into the investigation to find that kind of stuff, because it's not necessarily easy, especially when you have people walking around, right? You have people that are free to move. They can take the bus, they can take the train, they can hang out with their friends. All indicators like, well, there's no trafficking here. You got to look a little harder. You just got to dig a little deeper, and it takes time and resources.
Yeah, no, I call it the invisible rope. So it is bondage, as we spoke about. It's just bondage you can't see because of the control that they have. Trafficking is an intimate offense. It's intimate because the trafficker knows everything about the person, knows where they came from, knows how they got to this location, knows about the family, and the conception, and I know that you're familiar with this, but you overlook the fact that even though the family might be in a different country or in a different state, the trafficker knows where that family is. And so if they don't comply or obey the trafficker and engage in the acts that the trafficker expects them to engage in at that time and in that location, the family isn't safe because the family's a long ways away. The family's in as much danger as they were the day before, because they know where the family lives. It's usually a gang or a cartel of some sort, so that all they have to do is send the message back to that location where that family is so that the family's in danger. So not only are they a victim, but they're a hero to the family because they're not ratting the family out. They're not resisting the conduct, because if they do, the family the repercussions are on the family. So these are incredibly difficult cases, But we always look at the invisible rope, and we always ask ourselves, because for the jurors, for the judge to convince them that trafficking is occurring and that this isn't some autonomous decision that they want to engage in the commercial sex or the forced labor, is what is it that is causing this person to go home at night and to take a long train or bus or car ride to the brothel or wherever the force is happening or wherever the acts are expected, and then go home at night. If you have an uneducated jury, if you have a judge that's not familiar with these concepts, I mean, how do you convince that? How do you convince that person that this is happening? And then for the conduct to be so egregious, so heinous, that you cannot even possibly believe that another human would treat another human that way, let alone a child. So convincing our jurors, convincing our individual, using power and control, addressing the vulnerabilities of the victim, so that to get the victim to do what they've asked them to do.
So to continue with the power and control, as Greg mentioned, the invisible ropes, okay? And that's our job, to show those invisible ropes, to take away the defense, right? Because these cases are extremely hard to prove, extremely hard to convince a jury that a person with freedom of movement was actually, being trafficked. And so we have to overcome that stuff. So what we're looking for are indicators of these invisible ropes, and that's what this power and control wheel is all about. I like to refer to this process as the grooming process. It's where the victimization, in my mind, it's where it starts. It definitely doesn't end with just the power and control wheel, because it's continuous as long as the victim is involved in trafficking. But this is where it starts for me. And you have all these different aspects of the power and control wheel here. Being the power and control is central. The most important part of the trafficking case is showing that force, fraud, or coercion through some of these indicators here. Intimidation. So we kind of talked about it before. The intimidation of deportation, when we're talking about undocumented residents that are being victimized. Constantly, we'll hear from victims that they're being threatened, okay? Threatened with deportation, threatened, as Greg mentioned, families back home in their home country. Whether or not they know where that family is, the victim doesn't know that. And the trafficker will say, I'll just send, my buddies over there and they'll take out your whole family. Okay, they're away from their family. They're isolated in a country, a state that they know nothing about, and they're going to believe what that trafficker's telling them. So they're going to believe that they do have access to the family back home, and the family is an extreme motivator for people to do what the traffickers want. So a lot of intimidation with the threats of deportation, the threats against family, physical threats, and that's just more into a lot of this stuff. Emotional abuse, all kinds of verbal abuse and mind games, and you name it, and it's daily. It's not just a one-time thing. It's a daily thing. In order to break down a person and control the person, you have to work at it, right? So it's a daily occurrence. The emotional abuse, physical abuse. There's a thing we call a guerrilla pimp and a finesse pimp in investigations with sex trafficking. The guerrilla pimp is known for the physical abuse. So that particular trafficker will daily probably beat the crap out of somebody. They will physically punch, burn, hang. I mean, if you can think of it, that person is using that physical abuse against the victim, and it's incredible. The types of violence that are perpetrated on the victims. And again, it's a daily thing. Sex abuse. What better way to train a potential prostitute except by raping them many times a day. Getting them used to the fact that they're going to be used every day, 8, 10, 15 times a day. Having intercourse with a John or a purchaser. So a lot of sexual abuse. Isolation. We talked about isolating communication with the family, and that's part of the isolation. But you have physical isolation as well. I talked to a victim once that walked us through her grooming process. And the minute she was recruited in to this stable, is what we call a group of girls that are in a prostitution. So she got recruited into this stable. And the minute that she got recruited in, she got thrown into a basement of a house. She was chained. She was stripped naked. All of her hair was cut off. Every single piece of identity that young lady had was taken from her the minute she went into that stable. Completely isolated for months. And this was all the part of the process in controlling this individual, breaking this girl down so that she becomes reliant upon the trafficker. So that trauma bond is formed between her and the trafficker. She has to rely on that person for food, for water, for contact, physical human contact, everything. Everything goes through the trafficker, and the way you break that person down, isolate, beat them, sexually abuse them, intimidate them, threaten them, whatever. It all goes into that power and control. So that's why I like to spend some time on the power and control wheel, because this is an extremely important aspect of these cases. Especially when we're talking about prostitution. The thought amongst law enforcement for a long time is prostitution is a victimless crime. It's a vice crime. There's no victims. These are consenting adults. I would dare say, based on my experience, an overwhelming majority of these people that are involved in prostitution and human trafficking, I lost my point, but they are under complete control of these traffickers. They rely upon them for everything, and man, I wish I knew what I was about to say, because it was going to be good.
Maybe you need the air conditioner again.
Yeah, I might. So, but back to this power control. Everything surrounds power control, and these are just some of the ways. And I would dare say the majority of the ways that the traffickers groom their victims, and all of this, physical abuse, sex abuse, denying, blaming, minimizing, isolation, emotional abuse, intimidation, coercion and threats, economic abuse, using privilege, physical abuse. Oh, I forgot to mention drug abuse. Oh, I remember my point now. Vice crimes. It's a victimless crime, right? Law enforcement, their mindset was a victimless crime. So that's why we spend time on this, to teach them that these people are victims. These people are getting victimized every single day with all this stuff. And then you throw on drug abuse, right? Oh, the prostitutes are just out working to get their next high. Well, the reason why maybe that they're out there doing that is because they were forced to take drugs. And the addiction set in, which is what? Power and control, right? The trafficker will get them addicted to a highly addictive drug, heroin, methamphetamine, cocaine, whatever drug that they can use to get that person addicted to it, because the only way that they're going to get that drug and avoid being sick is through that trafficker. And so my goal when we're out teaching about trafficking and the victims within trafficking, we have to change that paradigm of thought that this victim sex trafficking is a victimless crime. Because I would say, again, the overwhelming majority of victims we run across are not doing it just because they want to. I don't know anyone that wants to wake up really and say, today I think I'm going to get beat by my trafficker, maybe once, maybe twice today. I might have to be sexually abused, 10, 15 times today. I'm not going to make any money. I'm not going to see my family. Yeah, today's a good day, right? No, not at all. And so, again, my goal is to change that mindset that these people are true victims, and they're victims multiple times, every single day. Do you have a comment?
I do, and I'll let you get to the air conditioner for just a sec and get your mind straight. But you also have to recognize that, it's easy for us to look and see the factors that would allow us to formulate the belief that they're being trafficked. We also find a lot of the time that they don't even know, that the victim does not relate as a victim. The victim, through emotional attachment because of the youthfulness of the victim when they were acquired, or the circumstances they came from, their vulnerability that we spoke about and the grooming that occurs. Many times we have individuals that we've encountered, all the signs of that trafficking, that invisible rope are present. And still, they don't want to cooperate. They don't want to give us the information. Some of the time, it's because, as we spoke about, there's fear, there's intimidation, force, fraud, and coercion. But the coercion element, when they are under the belief that they're helping their family, they're furthering their life, they're part of a relationship. So many times when we do our investigation, we have to slow down a little bit, and we have to let the victim catch up. We have to let the victim take a minute and breathe and feel as though they are safe in an environment, and then they have to begin to think through what they've been what has been occurring to them. And at some point, it clicks. At some point, they realize that they are or were a victim. And so as we go through our investigation and our prosecution, and we'll talk about this as well, as we build a broader case so that we have ways of charging an individual, whether it be tax fraud, racketeering, or if there was drugs involved. A lot of the time there's drug distribution occurring. And so we'll broaden our case so that we don't put so much emphasis on the victim. Because if you put the entirety of the case on the victim, to some extent the government is re-victimizing the victim. And that's something we want to try to avoid to do, if at all possible. Certainly every case has its nuances, but allowing the victim to come to grips and understand their circumstances and let the victim decide what they are or who they are in that circumstance is very important, because as we spoke about and as Marcus indicated to begin with, this is all about the victim. And so if we're breaking a trafficking operation up and we aren't cognizant of the ultimate goal, which is to free the victim, to allow the victim to become a survivor, if we do it the wrong way, we haven't accomplished anything. And so we want to make sure that we do it through the investigative stage and through the prosecution stage, which is to focus on that individual to see where they're at and their understanding of the circumstances. They were a victim for a reason. It's because they were vulnerable, they were manipulated, they were groomed, they were threatened, forced into this situation, and we need to be respectful to that and figure out in a case-by-case basis how to best proceed, how to best go forward, so that we can not only get the trafficker and put the trafficker in prison where they belong, but also so that the victim can begin their track towards being a survivor.
Yeah, and to piggyback on that, I often like to say that our goal as an investigative unit is to get a case together on the trafficker, right? But even more important than that, if we can free the victim from the chains of that trafficker, and we have to throw away a case or an investigation, as long as we freed that victim, got them the help that they needed, that's a win for us. And prosecution of that case is almost second, right?
Yeah, and we have to remember and remind ourselves that is the case, and that starts from the very, very first steps of the investigation. the benefit that we have, and this, from our experience, what works effectively, is that our law enforcement officers and our prosecutors are working together in what's called what we call an embedded model, and that means that throughout the whole course, we are building our case from day one. So when Nate receives a report that trafficking is occurring, and whether it's on the street where it's visible and apparent, or inside a building where we have to begin to build an investigation, we are working together to build the case to make sure that we proceed constitutionally, so that we're not violating a person's rights, but we're building the case together, so that when we eventually decide that we have a case and we can initiate the charging document, it's already built. It's already there. We've been working with the victim. We have victim services as part. When we bring the victim out of the circumstance, we have victim services in place, and I'm sure you guys do it similarly, where it's a victim-centered approach in that regard, that you have the victim service provider in place. But most importantly, and working together, both from the prosecution side and the law enforcement side, to ensure that it's the victim's safety before the case.
All right, so let's talk about an investigation that we did. I hope I don't refer to him as Mr. Rax. I hate giving him that credit of being Mr. Rax. So I'll just call him Rax. So I don't really like this guy. Let's see. Actually, we'll watch the media clip here. The day that we effected the arrest, and then we'll talk about Rax in a little bit more depth.
General's office finally put handcuffs on a man they've been watching for years. General's office finally put handcuffs on a man they've been watching for years, and Fox 13 News was there for the arrest.
Police call Victor Rax one of the scariest guys they've ever investigated. They say he's been molesting teenage boys.
Was because Rax is now in police custody, busted during a traffic stop Tuesday. And Wallentine believes his team now has the witnesses and the evidence to finally send him to prison.
Let's not make a mistake about this. He is a very evil man.
Wallentine heads up Utah's Secure Strike Force, a team created by the Attorney General to investigate crimes against undocumented immigrants.
It's about two things, really: sex and money.
Rax allegedly made thousands selling drugs. Serving a series of search warrants Tuesday, agents seized suspected meth, cocaine, marijuana, and spice from one of 3 homes Rax stayed at. Wallentine says Rax used undocumented Latino boys to sell those drugs in Salt Lake area schools. Teenagers he would first sexually abuse. And according to cops, that basically made them Rax's slaves.
A dual hammer of being able to expose the fact that they had been raped by an adult male, that they were victims of human trafficking. These are folks who are in the country without documentation. He could threaten them to be deported and also threaten their broader families.
And according to Wallentine, many in Utah's Latino community fear this mild-mannered looking guy due to his criminal history in Central America, suspected affiliation with the MS-13 street gang, and one terrifying story.
He certainly was in the elite in the gangs in Guatemalan prisons, and we can't confirm it, but there is a strong belief that he murdered his own mother.
He says Rax is innocent until proven guilty, but he also says Rax has been able to intimidate witnesses in the past to avoid prosecution. Cops, however, feel very confident this time.
Because of our efforts, we've been able to get corroboration from a number of sources who are willing to testify, who are willing to talk. And so I think Mr. Rax is now at the moment where he's going to meet justice, finally.
He believes this is a suspect who would still be out on the streets if not for the Attorney General's Secure Strike Force and the agents who have spent the better part of 5 years building up trust and contacts within local immigrant communities. Victor Rax was taken into the custody of Immigration Customs Enforcement while he awaits his first court hearing on numerous felony charges. Meanwhile, investigators say social workers are assisting some of Rax's alleged victims, but they think there's a lot more out there, many more teenage boys who have been abused by the suspect. If you're one of them or have any information, go ahead and call the Utah Attorney General's Victim Tip Line at 801-281-1203. In studio, Scott McCain, Fox 13 News, Utah.
Okay, that's Rax in a media nutshell. We'll go into a little bit more depth as far as the investigation into Rax and what he was doing. So about a year and a half previous to this investigation, our unit received a tip that there was this guy from Central America using kids to sell drugs, using 5th graders, 6th graders, 7th graders, so 10, 11, 12, 13-year-olds to sell drugs in the school. And at that time, the only information we got was a rough idea of where he was living, a rough idea of what he was driving. That's it. That's all we had. So we did the best we could with what we had, and we were able to identify his house, and we saw that, yep, he had interactions with kids, but we had really no way into him. We had no way to figure out exactly what he was doing because the information received, it was like an anonymous tip. There was no follow-up with it. Besides maybe trying a traffic stop on him or something like that, we couldn't really do anything with the information we had. And so we had to let it go, which is sad knowing what happened in the end, because we allowed victimization to essentially continue for another year and a half, unbeknownst to us, because all we thought was drugs. All we thought was this guy was using kids to sell drugs. We didn't know anything about the victimization until much later. So about a year and a half later, we have a confidential informant that comes forward and says, I'm really worried about my sons. I have 2 sons. One is about it was like 15, and one was about 12, and I could be off on those ages. I can't remember for sure. But the concern was that Rax had taken an interest in these kids, and Rax's victims of choice was about that age range, 10 to 15 years old. Do you have a question? Oh, okay, sorry. Rax's preference was boys between the ages of about 10 to 15. And this confidential informant apparently knew more about what Rax was up to and really started getting concerned about his own children because Rax was starting to pay attention, okay? And so he came forward with that information, and he was, at that point, that person was our way in. He knew Rax personally. He could buy drugs from Rax. And as soon as we had that little entry into Rax's life, we took it because of the knowledge that he was using kids to sell drugs. And then now the added knowledge that he may be offending on the kids that he was getting to sell drugs. And so this case took a huge priority because we now know we had live victims. And so with the initial information we received, we essentially started conducting surveillance. And for a little bit, it was just mainly during the drug deals that we were doing with them. And that was just to build some probable cause. We had to build this case as a drug case, as a dope case, because we couldn't get to the victims until we were able to secure search warrants and arrest Rax to take him out of the picture in hopes that helps the victims to come talk, so on and so forth. But we had to build it as a dope case, and so we started buying drugs from Rax. And when the investigation heated up, we had probably anywhere from teams of 8 to 10 people and we would watch racks from 8 o'clock in the morning till about 10 or 11 o'clock at night. Round the clock. We were watching him. Everything he did, there were people watching him. Like I said, 8 to 10 folks. So when you're talking about resources, this was an extremely resource-intensive case. You had 10 officers at any given time watching him. Rax trusted him. And so he said, I can buy drugs from him. And so we said, all right, let's buy drugs. Yes. Yeah. Sexually. So he hadn't offended on his kids yet. He was worried about it because he started seeing some grooming behaviors. So Rax, what he would do, and I was going to talk about this anyway, so might as well talk about it now, right? So Rax's grooming behaviors were, so all these children were underprivileged, undocumented children. Their families were poor. Their families were from out of the country, undocumented, really, just kind of living day to day. And Rax, what he would do to help groom the kids is he would give them money, he would buy them things, he would feed them, and he would do the same thing to their parents. So he would also be the drug dealer for some of their parents. So he would supply the parents with drugs. Again, I hope you guys are seeing this power and control wheel, right? So Rax was doing everything that we've been talking about with this power and control. And this guy, this confidential informant, he noticed that Rax was starting to take interest in his kids. And I would dare say, if Rax did not take interest in his kids, we probably would have never arrested him. Or at least he would have been able to offend a little while longer until we got more information. But yeah, so he came forward simply because he heard rumors that Rax was abusing kids, and he didn't want it to happen to his own. And he said, I can buy drugs from Rax. And that was our way in. I mean, it's one thing to know or to understand some criminal activity, but it's another to be able to investigate it, get into it, so that we can prove a case.
And let me bore you with some standards. The attorney can't just let this fly through. But in order to initiate an investigation and to continue through an investigation, you have to have a reasonable belief, meaning that there has to be some basis. The minute that reasonable belief eviscerates and it's no longer there, the investigation terminates. Probable cause is the standard, and I believe I was looking at the Human Trafficking Act, and what is the standard for under the federal Nigerian Human Trafficking Act for warrants? It's a belief, right? Reasonable suspicion. So I think that's really the same thing for us to continue an investigation. For us to do a warrant, we have to have probable cause. So whether it's for an arrest or for a court judge to allow us to go into a building or to do a search, it's probable cause. And then for conviction, it's beyond a reasonable doubt. And I think those are all concepts that you guys exercise as well. I just wanted to make sure that we went through that process. One of the things that we, and I believe all prosecutors do worldwide, is ensure if we're going to file a case, we don't file a case on probable cause. We file a case on a likelihood of conviction, and that standard is beyond a reasonable doubt. So, to ensure, constitutional rights and the premise that the person is innocent until proven guilty, it's very important that we exercise our standards properly, and to ensure, as we're going through the investigation, that we meet those standards, so that at the end of the day, we've not only ensured the Constitution and the rights of the defendant, but we ensure that the person goes to prison as they belong.
So this is just a very small sample, of course, of the pictures we did take while we were watching Rax. Again, we were watching them for 14 hours a day, 7 days a week, essentially. So what were we seeing? We were seeing racks with kids, picking up kids, taking them to school at times, taking them to stores, buying them shoes, buying them clothes, buying them things that their parents couldn't provide for them. And, so we just, took pictures wherever we could just to show the interaction he had with all these children. We followed racks. We followed the kids on buses. We jumped on trains with them. We waited at schools for them to show up. I mean, we did all kinds of things just to show how much interaction racks had with these kids. Because in the end, his relationship with the kids was paramount to the case because of that power and control he exerted over them, the invisible ropes that he had on those kids. Do you have something?
Yeah, and we had video going. We had hidden cameras. We had set a bunch of different things up. What's really important to this case is that we didn't know what was evidence. We did not know what was important, and we could not know or would not know until later on down the case when we had those witnesses testifying or those witnesses being interviewed and telling us what was happening. So in this case and some other cases, there had been rape or there had been some sort of monumental criminal act that had occurred. And in order to prove it, we were able to go back and pull the photographs or the video and corroborate what the victim had indicated occurred to them. So not only is it important at the time to observe, but it's also really important at the time to take photographs and document in a way that you preserve that activity that you're observing. Because later down the road, that becomes really, really important. And we talked about taking the pressure off the victim. One of the ways of doing that is having these photographs and having those videos to introduce so that the victim doesn't have to take on that examination or the vigor of that examination because it's already documented. It's no longer as material for credibility because the credibility is in the photograph. And so that's a really important aspect of the investigation that we do in the video. On this investigation, it was 4 or 5 months, and I can't even imagine how much video we had, but we had it, and we were ready to use it as necessary. And as the testimony came in from the interviews and preparing for trial, this is the stuff that really, from a prosecutor's perspective, was really golden. It was really instrumental.
To add to that, when we're talking about doing the videos and the photographs and the reports that we have to write afterwards, it's extremely important to do that throughout the initial phases of the investigation because I'll be darned if we notice something 4 or 5 months down the road once we're talking to these victims and we're like, oh yeah, we saw that, but we can't prove we saw it because we forgot to write it in a report or we forgot to get it on video or we forgot during the opportunity we had to take pictures. And so it's better to document enough evidence to get search warrants for each one. So what did we find at the house, at the houses? So, one of the houses I'm not sure that we got much of anything out of. The other house was his clean house. That's the house that he slept at. Okay, so he kept all of his criminal activity outside of the house that he slept at, because if you weren't watching close enough and all you saw was him going home every night, we would have missed the whole case. Because if all we had was the search warrant on the house that he slept at, we'd have been done because we had nothing. Okay, so that was the importance of building the case on all 3 houses and serving a search warrant at the same time on all 3 houses so that we can get all the evidence we could. So luckily, I was able to be at the right house where all the evidence was. Well, a lot of the evidence was anyway. Luck of the draw, I guess. But so the main house, the house that I say is the main house because it was with all the evidence, we found obviously evidence of drug distribution. So up there on the right, there were several ounces of marijuana wrapped up, and so he would give the marijuana to the kids to sell to other kids in the elementary schools, the junior high schools, and the high schools. Methamphetamine there. Methamphetamine, a heavy addictive stimulant. Not only was he having the kids sell it, but he was also providing it to the kids' parents who were also addicted. So we found a lot of evidence of drug distribution. Okay? This is not Rax's shrine. It's just a cool picture of a shrine. But
well, hold on. It's more than a cool picture.
There is a backstory.
Yeah.
We'll tell the backstory in a minute. This was actually another human trafficking case that we did investigate, but this was one of the coolest, most ornate shrines that we had come across. But the reason why I put this picture in is because Rax had these kids believing that he was some kind of voodoo witch doctor. Okay? Power and control. Remember that. Voodoo witch doctor. If these kids went and reported it to the police, or if these kids told their parents or their teachers or whatever, they were afraid that some magic spell was going to take them over and do whatever. But they fully believed, and I'll show you some evidence that's kind of gross a little bit later, that fed into this belief that Rax was a witch doctor. But so that was part of that power control Rax had over these kids when they thought, if I do anything, I'm going to come under some kind of weird spell. Okay?
Yeah, and two points to the story right now, which is we're dealing with both domestic children and international children that were there unlawfully. So no child in this community was safe because he would groom, he would identify the vulnerabilities of those children regardless of status. And I also want to further illuminate, I guess, these children. Not all these children were from poor homes or from homes that parents didn't care. There were children from homes where families were very concerned about their child's conduct, about where the child was going. And we talked about identifying vulnerability. Rax was a master at identifying vulnerability. In one circumstance, he would buy the child a phone because the child wanted a phone at 12, 13 years of age. And the parents were like, no, it's not time for you to have the phone. The parents are engaging in appropriate parental behavior for that child's age. And Rax would come in and go, you know what, here's the phone, here's some marijuana, some weed. Come over to the house and hang out. And really, the parents were jammed up a little bit with how do I proceed? Do I over-assert and the child then goes away and goes to Rax, who they called Uncle. Disgustingly enough, he was Uncle. And so these families are engaging in this power and control with Rax and trying to figure out how to deal with those issues. And so these dynamics are incredible, and they're incredibly scary. As a parent myself, and when I go out and lecture or we go to trainings, is how much information do you give? Because those of us that work in trafficking know how vulnerable our children are. And even in the best of circumstances, there is a vulnerability, whether the child is seeking independence or their friends are assisting in the grooming. One tactic that Rax used that Nate didn't mention, or at least we glossed over, but I think it's really important. It's important for us as a community to understand, and as experts in the field, which you guys are, is that he would go into the park, just the park where the boys were playing, and he would go with 2 or 3 of the children that he already has groomed and who are part of the unknowingly part of the criminal conduct that we'll get into more detail about. And so there was already this bridge or a sense of acceptability of this individual. He's already been vetted by these other children, so it's okay for me to hang out. And look, they get to go, to McDonald's or to whatever restaurant. They get phones. They get new shoes. Shoes was a huge thing, and I know children, regardless of where you live, whatever country you're from, shoes are the thing, right? Shoes make you look good. In fact, I was worried about losing my shoes on the way over here, but I didn't, and you know, I'm super stoked. Children are super stoked about shoes, and this was a major way of creating this relationship and creating this trust to the point when they were actually, and we'll get into the conduct, but one of the reasons the children weren't talking is because they didn't see themselves as victims, or if they did, they had been isolated to the point that they thought they were the only one. The families, most of the families had no clue at the pervasiveness of this conduct or the perpetrating of this conduct on each of the children. So I don't want to be overly judgmental at all to the families from our perspective, because it would not be fair. It would not be fair to judge them. They were trying to be good parents, most of them. Some did have addictions. Some had their own issues. But again, that goes to the vulnerability. Just because your parents are on drugs or like to use drugs doesn't mean that you should be victimized to this extent. And so, I'm confident that any of these parents, had they known what was happening to their children, would not have been okay with it and would have stepped in. The expertise of RACS is, one, why this is such a great case study, and why, as a parent, you know, I'm always concerned and probably overly parental, if that's a word, I don't know. But so let me talk about this. All right, this is fun.
This is a side story, by the way.
Segue. Are we okay on time? Yeah, we have like 12 hours, right? We can keep going. Yeah, it's like 7 in the morning in Utah, so I'm ready to go now. I got 8 hours a day ahead of me. Settle in. So this is in a different case. And when the investigators went in the brothel, this was one of the rooms. And it's Saint Morte. If none of you are familiar with Saint Morte, it's a Central American saint, a Latin saint, and it's been adopted by criminals who, as you can see, they put their gifts there, and then the saint will look over them in their criminal enterprise. So under most circumstances, it's a dead giveaway when that is observed, whether it's in a vehicle, the little miniature one. And this one was quite large. And so, oh, okay, all right. So in there, our officers, obviously law enforcement, we're trained, we know what we see, and we're very respectful about the saint. We certainly don't want to make light of somebody's beliefs, although we may not agree with them in this case because it's used for criminal behavior and to overcome the criminal behavior. So in one hand, you can see that there's paper, and there was also money in it. And our investigators, obviously, they're looking for evidence. So rather than disturb the rather than disturb the table itself, they did want to see what was in the hand. And in the hand was a large sum of money and this note. And this is we've been doing human trafficking cases for a couple years, and when they pulled the paper, you'll see that there's a bunch of names. In paragraph 1, Utah Attorney General Mark Shurtleff. So the premise, I guess, is that these people would be cursed, or these people would have some sort of maybe negative energy. Well, as you look, Mark Shurtleff was the Attorney General 2 years before this, and he had been indicted. So I guess it wasn't going too well for him. John Swallow was the next Attorney General, and he had been indicted as well. Kirk Torgensen was somebody who I do respect, and was the chief deputy at the time that these two individuals were Attorney Generals. And he became a witness in the case, and his employment was terminated. Not because he was involved, but I think just because he was too closely associated with the conduct of the Attorney General. So we're 3 deep on the list of 5. Brian Tarbett was a temporary Attorney General, and he retired, and he's happily traveling the world. I think he's doing quite well, which, to my relief, because as you'll see, I'm the next person on the list. So I do keep track of Brian Tarbett to make sure things are going well for him because he's my buffer. As you'll see down, DOPL is Department of Professional Licensing, and in the United States, for massage therapists, they get their license, and it's one way to kind of, as a distraction to law enforcement, that you get your massage license, not for the purpose of commercial sex, but to give different types of massage. But they do hate that they have to get licensed, at least as a distraction. The Secure Strike Force is what Nate supervises, and there are a human trafficking strike force. So when we talk about our investigations, particular to our office, it's through the Secure Strike Force. They're doing pretty well for the most part. I guess they're doing well. And I should probably knock on wood as I have this conversation. But Salt Lake City Police Chief Chris Burbank, he was relieved of his duties due to an incident. And John Lyons, ICE. So when you heard, if you had the opportunity to be in Lagos when Attorney General Sean Reyes spoke, he spoke about OUR, Operation Underground Railroad, where they do the international human trafficking work. John Lyons is now working for them. He retired from ICE, happily so, on his own terms. So that's good. So we at least share good fortune at this moment. Daniel Arano, in paragraph number 6, I put him away for life in prison for trafficking a child, for raping the child and trafficking the child, as well as the mother, and some. That's a whole nother story. If we'll reserve that for the second 8-hour session. Manuel Arano is his brother, who we put in prison and then deported back to his homeland in Guatemala, and Frank Smith and Vanessa Melendrez at the bottom there are they're doing well also. Joking aside, one, I was very respectful to them and their attorney during court processes. She failed to show a couple times. I overlooked it and agreed and stipulated to a continuance out of respect, and I really didn't want to agitate the situation more than I had to. But as it turned out, in this particular case, there was not trafficking. We were not able to charge trafficking. We charged her with running a house of prostitution. But what's really important to us as a whole, as our office, is that by engaging in these cases and having successful outcomes with Daniel Arano, who you saw on that list, we felt strongly that we were demonstrating to the community that we were out there aggressively investigating and prosecuting in ways that you couldn't even understand or conceive. So we were getting the traffickers as the traffickers were getting us, meaning that the traffickers, they're improving or changing how they conduct their activities. Well, we were doing the same thing, and we were always changing how we were conducting our activities, so they did not know if they were being investigated or whether we were investigating them. So in this case, one of the reasons I treated her with respect, all kidding aside, is when we arrested her, when we said, when we came in and she knew who we were, she said, "I'm not trafficking children. I'm not trafficking anyone. Everyone is over the 18 and they want to be here." And from our perspective, that was very important to us, because that meant that we've made an impact in the community. We're changing behavior. Now, we may not have changed everybody's behavior, but at least they knew who we were and what we were about. My wife doesn't know that I'm on the list, so if you ever run across my wife, keep that on the down low. But this was a great opportunity to know that we were making the impact that we were looking to make, and I was pretty cool with the law enforcement. Those guys, they thought I was all right after that. I don't know, maybe that's dissipated now, but
I think we still like you. All right.
Thank you.
Back to Rax. So this is Rax's shrine, actually. So another thing that they try and do is they use these shrines for protection as well. And I've seen, multiple shrines. I've seen shrines that have police badges around candles, to protect from the police and all that kind of stuff. Greg mentioned that they donate to to whoever it is that they're worshiping for protection. So Rax was donating to his own shrine for protection. Also, if you had yeah, there's a snake in there. I'm sure there's some ritualistic thing with that. If we had, there's multiple other pictures that take a little bit closer look, but there are IDs.
And these children would, were like, oh my gosh, this is, and then he would track them. He had, knew their phone, so he knew if they met with a girlfriend or they went out with a friend. He knew all of that, and he'd say, you know what, it's my God. It's
it's the magic.
It's the magic that sees you and what you're doing.
Oh yeah, these kids firmly believed he was a warlock or had crazy magic powers. I'll tell you that Rax did not. He was not a witch doctor. He was very human, and yeah, we'll get into that as well. So that was Rax's shrine. See, that's why I like showing this one, because it's a much cooler picture. But Rax's shrine tells a story as well. Some more evidence. So in the shrine, like I said, there were pictures of young boys, trophies, mementos of all the young boys that he had offended upon. That's just one of many pictures we found that he had. He took a lot of pictures of the boys he'd interacted with. This is where it gets a little bit gross. Those two 2-liter bottles that appear to be the correct way.
Semen?
Semen, yes. So, yes, urine and semen, a mixture. And my understanding is that at times there were, some feces and hair.
But it's from the boys. It's
right.
The boys' semen.
Well,
the boys'
yeah,
semen.
A little bit of both, right?
Yeah.
Like a mixture, so that the two people, they're bonded, right, through all this magic. And so, what's that? Yes. And so again, these boys, they some more firm belief that he was some kind of witch doctor, because he made these little human potions. I'm just glad I wasn't the evidence custodian that night, because I didn't really want to touch that stuff.
So Nate, and when we say boys, he really had an affinity for the 12 to 14-year-old boys. So these boys, these children, are still really influential. At about 14, he set them free. He set them loose, but would use them to recruit maybe a different family member, another boy. He only wanted boys. And so when we're talking about how you can influence these children, it's because they're not much older than 13 or 14 at the time.
Yeah, and we'll get to this at some point. So Rax had been victimizing folks for 15 years, give or take. So although he had been victimizing people for 15 years, the boys, they all stayed the same age, and they just continued to recycle, right? So we had numerous victims. Okay, this was one of the oddest things I've seen on a search warrant. So you walk into this room, all right? So first of all, it's like a duplex, a fourplex, 4 little apartments. And Rax was subleasing, renting from the lady that rented the apartment. And he was renting just the room. And another kind of scary part, the lady had young children as well. Luckily, they weren't 12 to 15, because then we would have really had to worry. They were much younger. And of course, he wasn't abusing them, because they weren't his preference. But there were women and children in this home, and Rax had rented the room. So the minute you walk in the door, you see, and it's like a 10-foot by 10-foot room, and this took up about 8 feet by 8 feet. So there was really not a whole lot of room outside of this tent fort that he built. And it was closed up, like the picture there on the left. Any guesses as to why this tent was made? Come on. Go. Say what? Secrecy. Yes, privacy. If someone were to walk into Rax's room while Rax was offending, do you think that they would probably call the police? Probably, right? Because it's one thing to know, it's another thing to see. And so I believe, and I don't know that necessarily we ever proved it, but I believe he built that to hide his activities from, you know, maybe the women and the woman and the children that were in the house, just in case they accidentally came in at the wrong time. So he had this fort, and we took the middle blanket down, and, you know, you have the bed, you have the children's blanket there, you know, kind of weird. What he would do is he'd bring the boys in, and he would watch pornography. And so the TV there, he'd get them on the bed, he'd turn on pornography, he'd get the boys, you know, all excited, and then he would offend, okay? And so
well, he thought he got them excited.
Right. But that's how he kind of broke the ice, I guess, with the boys by showing them the pornography right before the offenses. Did you have something to say?
Yeah. So just interject here is, you know, so we're kind of in the throes of the investigation. You know, when we heard the first story and, you know, the first child, and would describe this to us, that there are people in the house, right, that live there. And Nate's statement that it's one thing to know and it's another thing to see, it's prophetic, because when that child describes to you the sexual conduct that's occurring, which, I mean, it's unnatural in and of itself, but it's also unnatural in how it's occurring, and to describe a location in which we could go and see people living there in a small house, and there's 5, 6 people, adults. I mean, prosecutors, defense attorneys, law enforcement, all of you here, students, you know, you're the jurors, right? How do you respond to that? That a 12-year-old child is going to articulate to you that they're in a home being abused by somebody who doesn't live there, and there are 6 other people in the home, right? No jury's going to convict that. The defense attorney is looking at those facts and thinking that that's a strong case for the defense. And from an investigative standpoint, you know, all right, well, we need corroborating evidence. How do you even begin to corroborate a story in which it occurs within a closed building with people in there that should know what's going on? How do you do that? You're not going to find the urine and semen, right? So DNA, that's not an issue. That's not an option. So in this case, and I don't want to, if I'm jumping ahead, but in this case, we had one victim, and then we had 2, and then we started to slowly going along, and then we had 3, and then we had 4, and we had 5. Now, we've talked about, and we'll get into this quite a bit when we get to the filing stage, but what did we know we had? What criminal enterprise did we have? Anyone? Students? No one? We had drug distribution. The guy was running drugs, and we had a bunch of drugs now. We've seen the drugs. So that's what we had. That's what we focused on, and we put the criminal enterprise together on a drug distribution. All right? Are we close to the arrest? Can I talk about that? Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, along with the TV where he showed the pornography, I don't know if it's lucky or not, but the arrow there is pointing to a used condom that we found. So, you know, good evidence, right? If we needed it, more proof that yes, this victimization was occurring, and there was just one small piece of the puzzle, and just to help get over that hump of this was really happening, and it was just amazing as victims came forward to hear the stories, and a lot of the stories were pretty much the same thing, right?
Yeah. Well, that was that in and of itself. We had no evidence, right? we had no evidence of what was happening to these children. So what was our evidence? Anyone? Students? No?
What's the evidence we have to work with for trafficking? The testimonies of the victims. Yeah.
Yeah. Cumulative
that's a huge
testimony.
piece.
Cumulative testimony was our strongest piece of the case.
Yeah. You have one person come forward and say that, you're like, I don't know. Doesn't sound too believable. That's pretty out there. I can't see an actual person doing something like that to somebody. And then you have another person come forward that says almost the same exact thing as the first person. And those two people don't even know each other. And then you have 3 and 4 and 5. And I think we ended up identifying over 20 victims and from all over the place. Victims had moved out of state, we tracked down. 25, 30-year-olds that came forward and said that they were victimized when they were 12 to 15 years old. And all of them shared a similar story. And that's what helped us put together the trafficking case. We understood that this was happening, and our goal was to prove that, but we had to do it through the drug distribution. And
well, and a key aspect of this is each of those victims did not know that there were other victims. And that's going to be a theme as we go through this process, is that although, you know, for credibility, that's helpful, that's important. But for victimization and transitioning from a victim to a survivor, at this moment in time, they all thought they were a victim and they were the only one. All right.
Here, this is Greg's proud moment right here. I don't want to take that from him.
Well, so here's what's important. When you first saw the media clip was when we initiated the arrest. And that's important because we utilize the media. And I don't know if you have a strong relationship with the media. It's not always good, right? They sometimes cut your statements and make you say something or show that you said something that you really didn't intend. We have a really good working relationship with our media. And one of the things that we use is, remember we talked about what is the strength of our case, right? Corroborating statements of multiple victims. Well, we had a number of victims, and we knew that we had a person that had been engaged in this conduct for the last 10 years, at least 10 years, if not 15. So we used the media, and we gave a number and said, hey, if you know anybody, any children that hung out, as you saw, and we did multiple media releases, but if you know anybody that hung out with this individual, give us a call, and you know we'd like to talk, whether directly or indirectly. And that's how we acquired the interviews or the testimony of multiple victims. So as I indicated, we initiated this case as a drug trafficking case. So when he was arrested on drug trafficking. There were no human trafficking charges, no sex offenses against children charges in this case. Nate and his team would monitor the jail calls, and so we knew exactly what was happening because he was communicating confidently to his family and brother who were on the outside in our community and talking to them about getting out, not going to prison. You know, it's a drug offense, which, if it remained a drug offense, would be true, that he probably wouldn't go to prison. He'd go on probation of some sort. What's that?
Get deported for the 8th time.
Yeah, and be deported, although this would be, yeah, that's true. So it also bought us time because we needed the time to interview the witnesses, and we wanted to put together a really strong case before we filed on the human trafficking. At this point, we knew he wasn't tampering with our witnesses. He wasn't trying to communicate to the children because he didn't think we even had a clue. And in fact, we really shouldn't have had a clue, but for a really dedicated investigative team that was asking the right questions and looking for the right evidence. Ultimately, when we did get our case put together, and we put our case together in stages. So the first stage was about 10 children that had been interviewed and that we could rely upon. The next, so we filed an amended information or amended indictment, and then we did it again, and we did it again, and we were just continuing to do that. And the conversation was changing from Rax as he was being held in custody because he was in jail and he's using the phone to call to the outside. His demeanor was changing and his conversation was changing, and he was tampering with our witnesses. A couple things that we had to deal with in this case at this stage. One was our confidential informant. How do you handle this? Our strongest witness is now the father of 4 victims. It changes the dynamics of the case. It changes how we proceed with the case. And how we handle this person, right? He's now a father. He's no longer an informant. He's now a father, and he's now dealing with a great amount of guilt and implication as to the conduct that occurred to their children. So we have to change how we're even approaching the case after we filed. And everybody who works these cases, whether you're on the defense side, on the prosecution side, the case changes. It's never the same case that you file. Also, legislatively, our code was at the time too narrow, and he used the children. So this was actually a labor case, really, to begin with, because he was using the children to traffic his drugs during school. So, you know, that was a problem that we identified early to understand that this scenario isn't right. So he's running his children to carry the drugs. He's also using the drugs to get the children addicted to drugs. Anybody see the vulnerability? Right? Not going to school, getting free drugs, shoes, right? At 12, 13 years old, how many of your children like to go to school? Anyone? No? All right. So they don't have to go to school. They get high on weed. They get to watch, you know, do whatever they want all day, and then they go home. It's beautiful from a kid's perspective. Yeah. So, wow, we're doing all right, huh? We just need 30 minutes. That's it, huh? We could talk for days on this. So this was a labor trafficking case. In that labor trafficking case was sexual assault, and serious sexual assault. In the state of Utah, it's statutory rape for a child under the age of 14. So for the children that were victims at age 12 and age 13, it was a pretty easy charge. From a prosecutor's and law enforcement's perspective, it was age and act, all right? And, you know, as you saw, the urine, the semen, the condoms, you know, we're doing DNA testing, we're building our case, we're putting it together as quickly as we can. We're interviewing, we're listening to the jail calls, in which now there's outright witness tampering, and instructions for the brother to go and talk to individuals to get them to not testify, which in and of itself is very effective, right? Because, you know, he's a witch doctor, he has this influence in the community. So, you know, time's running short for us on the case. Yeah, anything else before I pull the trigger?
Yeah, I will say, what happened to Mr. Rax?
Well, I was in Mexico actually for a vacation for a week, and I got a call. Rax hung himself in jail. I don't know how to feel about that. You know, it's a very, even today, it's a very difficult concept to, as a prosecutor, as an attorney, to ensure the proper outcome, the right outcome in this case, that I firmly believed. And he terminated the process. So, now what? Well, I don't know at the time. And I'll tell you what we did. You can judge whether it was correct and what we did was right or not. So went to court and let the judge know. Obviously, the defense attorney was there without his client because he knew. And the defense attorney was like, all right, we're done. You know, next case, he was a public defender, which means that he was court appointed. Somebody I had worked with for years. I knew quite well, very competent attorney. And he thought he was done. He had a little bit of a temper. I have a little bit of a temper too, so it kind of worked out well. But the fact of the matter is he thought he was done. And in all circumstances, you are done. Why weren't we done? Anyone? Why weren't we done? Victims. So I told the judge, I said, Your Honor, as respectfully as I could, Your Honor, and this was a fantastic judge. I said, Your Honor, I'm not going to dismiss the case. Won't do it. I can proceed. There's no reason why I cannot proceed on this case. However, the government will choose to abandon the case. I will not dismiss the case. And it's incredibly important. And the judge pondered that a little bit, and the defense attorney just yelled. He just yelled at me. Told me I was grandstanding this case. I didn't know how to walk away. Which is fine, because that's not, I mean, I'm not there to make friends, obviously. The judge, while the defense attorney's yelling at me, the judge actually bought the judge an opportunity to contemplate the request. I said, Your Honor, I want a hearing. I want a hearing for these victims. Because in Utah, there's in our Constitution, victims have a right to be heard. And in this very unusual circumstance, I asked the judge for the opportunity for these victims to be heard. And frankly, I didn't know why. I just knew that it seemed as though it needed to be done. So the judge reluctantly set a hearing date, a couple weeks out, 2 weeks out. And so over the defense attorney's protest, he told the defense attorney he didn't need to be there. And I said, yeah, you know, that's probably a good idea. He's a jerk. I said something else, actually, on the record. But so, and to the defense attorney's credit, I mean, or I don't want to implicate him because frankly, that's not his role, and he didn't understand what was being asked. And I don't know that the judge knew. And frankly, I don't know that I knew what was being asked. Other than I just thought, you know what? These victims have a right to be heard. So the victim advocate, yes, sir. Sure. Yes. Well, that's a great question, John. Well, so anytime that there's, my point to the judge was anytime that there's an action that occurs, not just a pre-trial or something, but an action that occurs, the victim has a right to be notified and present. And so to be heard is maybe too strong of a word, but to be present, we do make sure that they have the opportunity to be heard at a sentencing, right? They have that right if there's a conviction to speak to the judge. I know, right? No. Yes, that's right. So so alleged victim, if you will, or alleged is really the premise. And the fact of the matter is it's a major hearing, whether the judge is going to decide to dismiss or not. They have a right to be present at that decision. And so procedurally, I asked the judge to hold off on that decision. I'm asking, it was a Latin term beyond my expertise, but it's to basically abandon prosecution. And so my motion, which was filed, was to abandon prosecution, not to dismiss the case. So because I needed jurisdiction still, right? Because if the judge dismisses, then he's like, yeah, go meet at the cafeteria. I don't care. What I needed was jurisdiction. So I maintained jurisdiction by asking not only that it be to just abandon prosecution, but to make that decision at the next hearing. Does that answer the question? Yeah. Well, I don't. If he wants, if he'll let me, if he wants to dismiss it, that's his decision. My request is that we abandon the case. It just sits idle for eternity. Yes. Yeah. I wanted them to be present, and my thought was, you know what? If the judge will allow them to speak, because they've been robbed. In my mind, they've been robbed of the opportunity to be heard, the opportunity to be present as victims, as witnesses. Well, exactly. This is great, right? This is fantastic, because this is the conversation that we're having in our office. Because these trafficking cases are outside the box. You cannot have a template on how to prosecute these cases. 300 cases. Tell me how many of those are the same. Right. I could, but I'm not. I could. Yeah, interest of justice, resources, you wouldn't do it. I could. Yes. Yes. In absentia. In absentia, he chose to not be present. Well, yeah. Right. And that's a really good point, because we just forfeited. We didn't even worry about the assets. Yeah.
Well, he didn't really have any assets.
Yeah. No. Yes. Sorry, yes. Awaiting trial. Thank you. Sorry, I missed that. Awaiting trial before trial, he killed himself. Had not started. Well, yes.
But
I love it. I love it. Okay.
yes. Well, this is getting out of control.
Best lecture ever, right? Okay. Here's I don't know that I have the answer. There's Yes. He was arraigned. Yeah. Yes. Yes. He was arraigned. So here's the thing. I don't know if you're right. I don't know who's right. But he didn't plead.
He didn't. He didn't have a chance. He died.
He was awaiting trial. He was arraigned. Yes. No. Oh, okay. So terminology issues. Okay. And I'm running loose here. I only got a half hour before. So I'm running loosey-goosey here. All right. When we file the information, okay? You file the information, there will be a probable cause hearing. And we had not even gotten to the probable cause hearing. So the information had been filed, the warrant is holding him, and we're waiting for the probable cause hearing, which would be arraignment. Yes. And, well, or plead not guilty, and then go to trial, or plead. None of that happened. But I filed the charges on probable cause. Woo! All right. So
this conversation is why I'm not an attorney. We got our joy out of arresting him, so we had to let him get his joy one way or the other.
All right. So yes.
Well, first of all, I believe that the suicide was part of the abuse. He didn't want to give the victims the joy. So it's almost his ultimate weapon. And I think that in terms of jurisdiction, if the court was to exercise jurisdiction to dismiss the case or to stay it as you were proposing, then you were right to insist that it was your duty to provide the court with sufficient material that will enable it exercise that jurisdiction to terminate the proceeding, and in what manner of order to make at the end of the case. And it was therefore your duty to supply all materials that will enable the court to exercise that jurisdiction. So if you felt at that time that you needed the voice of the complainants or the victims, I think that there was jurisdiction there, and that you acted rightly by stopping the judge from making the decision ex cathedra before sufficient material has been presented, which would include the opportunity for the victims' material to be before the court. So I don't think that there was any jurisdictional issue. It was an issue of exercise of jurisdiction and a presentation of material for the exercise of that jurisdiction.
Thank you. The judge has ruled. I'll take that ruling. Ha! I got the ruling. All right. So there's an important element to all of this, though. What a fantastic exercise, because truly, you know, this was the academic discussions that we were having, and how to get the victims in front of the court, at the court. So the victim advocate and myself and investigators, we had 40 victims of various ages. And we had terminated the investigation at that point, but we knew that we had probably double, if not triple that, of victims in the community. So each of these victims, now understand, the statement I had indicated earlier is incredibly material to this conversation as well, which is that these victims had been offended sexually at 12 to 14. They do, but they don't care about the verdict. They don't care about guilty or not guilty. They care about being heard and about being believed. And a lot of the time, when that victim takes the stand, you watch the victim transition into a survivor because they had the strength to finally stand up to the trafficker, to the perpetrator. It's an incredible metamorphosis for this individual. And so the thought was, well, let's provide that to these children because it was taken away from them, that opportunity. Let's let them come and speak in an empty courtroom with the judge on the stand. So we've probably had 20 of the boys. Some of the boys were in juvenile detention, so they had to be transported. Why do you think they're in juvenile detention? Drugs. I mean, they just weren't right. They were not grasping life and the details of life. A perpetrator does this to young boys. You can't expect them to get through life without some help or some time. So they came, and what I saw was each of these children began to look around. They began to look around and see that there was more than one victim, that they themselves were a victim, and everybody around them had been susceptible to rags. So nobody was going to talk. Like, nobody was, I'm not talking. I'll go, but I'm not talking. You know, they're kind of tough and just going to be there. That's fine. You know what? Be there. You don't have to be there, but the judge will listen to you if you would like to speak. So one brave individual started to speak, and he spoke at the podium facing the judge. And I can't underestimate how powerful this moment was, because the judge made the opportunity for the victims to speak. He, was very respectful, embracing. I don't think he had to do this. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. But you know what? He embraced it, and he took that opportunity. By the end, every boy, and I say boy because even when you're 20, when you're talking about when the offense occurred, you're a boy. You go back to the time and the age that you were when you were perpetrated upon. So each one of these individuals spoke. And each one of those individuals had that moment when you saw they walked up to the podium as a victim and they left a survivor? I can't even, you know, it's still an emotional event. 10 years, what is it, 5 years? 5 years. You know, I wish we could follow these individuals and know how they're doing. And in my parting remark is this, is that as prosecutors and as law enforcement, don't stop when you get the conviction. Don't stop when you're done with the case. Whether it's a boy, a girl, an adult, make sure that there is a plan. Make sure that the victim, as they progress to survivorship, that there is a plan in place. Prosecutors aren't good with victim services. Law enforcement's not good with victim services. I think they're worse than I am. But there needs to be a plan. Have something in place with victim services. And if possible, check in. I had the opportunity for a victim. She was 16 when she was raped and when she was being trafficked against her will. And the victim, and this was just when we started, we haven't even talked about it. So when we were doing these cases early on, we got a victim service provider in place, one that we trusted and that was able to provide the services through funding. And I got to tell you, they called me like 4 years later. This was one of my first cases, the Daniel Aranaho case, actually. And this young girl, 16, who was not in the country lawfully, who had a child born in the country lawfully, and who had a mother born in the country lawfully. You see how she became a victim? Any idea, right? They were able to provide services for her, and she was able to graduate high school with a GED. So that's the equivalent, but you do it outside of school. And I had the honor of being there for her graduation. So the point of that is that our job isn't done. Our job isn't done with a conviction or an acquittal. And it doesn't have to be you that follows the victim, that helps the victim through survivorship. But please make sure something's in place for them. Please ensure that they have the opportunity to transition to be the person that they were meant to be. Thank you, guys. Thank you for allowing us to be here.
Thank you so much, Greg and Nate, for that presentation. It was quite interactive, and I'm grateful for everybody that contributed to make it a very interactive session. It's now time for us to go for lunch, and after lunch, we're going to have 2 more sessions. Please, we have seen the case study. We have actually prepared ourselves, and we have actually participated in it. It's now time for us to hear about our own Nigerian experience, because after the launch, we're going to be talking about investigating human trafficking in Nigeria. And we'll also be talking about these victim services, how we can actually protect the victims. And then, of course, we have a fund for the protection and compensation of this victim. We actually have all those things in Nigeria already. We're going to be hearing from NAPTIP. We're going to be discussing that after the lunch break. So at this time, I will beg your indulgence to go for lunch, but we're going to be back here. Lunch is exactly 1 hour. Please don't go away. Come back after lunch, and then we'll continue so that we can finish early, so that by 3:45 we can ask our questions and we can go back to our various states. But before we go for lunch, we'll be having photo session right now. We'll have a short photo session before we go for lunch. So I will employ everybody to come out. I think we'll use here for the, no, we'll use in front of the lobby, in front of the reception area for the, right? In front of the reception, hotel reception, downstairs, just before we go in for lunch. Please, let us meet there immediately for a photo session, please. It would be good if you have your tag around your neck, because you also need that for lunch, please. Okay, the room will be locked, so if you want to keep some things here, you can, but it's better you take it with you, but we'll lock the room as we go out.